Autumn 1879, Cottonwood Creek, Colorado Territory. The noon sun beat down on the dusty Main Street, and when the stagecoach rolled into town, most folks barely glanced up. Another day, another arrival in a place where people were always coming and going. But when Annabelle Sawyer stepped down from the coach, more than a few heads turned, not in admiration, but in quiet assessment of the new arrival. She wore a simple blue calico dress, modest and practical, with her light brown hair pulled back in a sensible bun. At 22, Annabelle carried herself with a quiet dignity that belied the whispers that followed her as she collected her trunk. "That must be the new schoolteacher," said Mrs. Hollister to Mrs. Parks, not bothering to lower her voice. "Plain as porridge, poor thing, going to have a hard time finding a husband out here with all the pretty girls about." Annabelle pretended not to hear. She had long ago accepted what people saw when they looked at her, nothing remarkable, nothing to write home about. Just a girl with ordinary features, a smattering of freckles across her nose, and eyes that were neither dramatically dark nor strikingly blue, but a simple hazel that changed with the light. What they couldn't see was the fire in her heart, the determination that had brought her halfway across the country to start a new life. What they couldn't see was how she'd nursed her father through consumption until the bitter end, how she'd taught herself to read Latin from her father's old books, or how she'd saved every penny for 3 years to make this journey. The schoolhouse waited at the edge of town, a simple one-room building with peeling white paint and a bell tower that looked ready to topple in the next strong wind. This would be her domain now, her chance to build something of her own. Annabelle had just one belief that had carried her through the hardest times. Education was the key that unlocked every door. If she could teach these frontier children to read and calculate and think for themselves, she would have done something worthwhile with her life, even if she remained Miss Sawyer until her dying day. Love was a luxury she had never expected to afford. Beau Zachary nudged his horse forward, the rolling grasslands stretching before him like an ocean of gold. At 25, he had already lived several lifetimes, it seemed. He'd been breaking horses since he was 12, fought in skirmishes with cattle rustlers since 16, and managed his own small herd for the past 3 years. The cattle drive was nearly over, just 2 more days to Cottonwood Creek where he'd deliver the herd to the railroad and collect his payment. His men were tired but in good spirits, knowing that whiskey and women awaited them in town. But Beau had no interest in the saloon girls or the drinking contests that would inevitably break out. He'd seen enough men lose their earnings, their dignity, and sometimes their lives to such indulgences. He preferred to keep to himself, save his money, and expand his ranch acre by acre. "A man needs nothing but open sky and good land," his father had told him before a stray bullet took him during a bank robbery when Beau was just 17. "The frontier ain't no place for soft hearts. It'll break you sure as anything." Beau had taken those words to heart, hardening himself against the disappointments and dangers of frontier life. He'd buried his mother and father both before he was 20, lost a brother to fever, and watched good men die for foolish reasons. What he wanted was simple: his own spread big enough to sustain him, with no one to answer to and no one to worry about but himself. What he told himself he didn't need were the complications that came with letting people too close. "Riders coming," called Jimmy, the youngest of his drovers, pointing to the horizon where dust signaled approaching horsemen. Beau's hand instinctively moved to his revolver, though he didn't draw. Out here, strangers were a threat until proven otherwise. "Steady, boys," he called, urging his horse forward to meet whatever was coming their way. The approaching riders turned out to be a farmer and his son, looking for a stray cow. Their relief at finding friendly faces rather than bandits was palpable, and they eagerly shared news from town. "New schoolteacher arrived yesterday," the farmer said. "From back east somewhere, woman this time. Last one we had was that old fellow who couldn't stop coughing long enough to teach the alphabet." "She's staying at the boarding house?" asked one of Beau's men, already calculating his chances. "Yep, seems decent enough. Nothing special to look at, though," the farmer shrugged. "Town's already taking bets on how long before she gives up and heads back east. Either that or how long till she ends up married to old Whitwer Jenkins. He's the only one desperate enough to court a plain Jane like that." Beau frowned at the casual cruelty but said nothing. It wasn't his concern how the town treated its new schoolteacher. He had cattle to deliver, supplies to purchase, and a long ride back to his small ranch afterward. The last thing he needed was to get involved in town affairs. Yet as they resumed their journey, he found himself oddly curious about this new arrival who had already been judged and found wanting by people who barely knew her. The schoolhouse door creaked open, and Annabelle looked up from her lesson plans to find a small girl of about 7 standing hesitantly in the doorway, a rag doll clutched in one hand. "Hello there," Annabelle said warmly. "Have you come to see the schoolhouse?" The girl nodded, her blonde braids bobbing. "Pa says school starts Monday and I wanted to see what it's like. I've never been to school before." "Well, come in then. I'm Miss Sawyer and I'll be your teacher." Annabelle gestured to the rows of desks. "You can sit anywhere you like and tell me what you think." The girl approached cautiously, finally choosing a desk in the front row. "I'm Lily Mason, my pa runs the general store." She glanced around the bare walls. "It doesn't look very pretty." Annabelle laughed. "Not yet, but we'll fix that. I thought we might make some decorations together, all the students. Would you like to help me plan what we could create?" Lily's eyes widened with delight. "Really? I could help." For the next hour, Annabelle and Lily discussed pictures they could draw, pressed flowers they could collect, and maps they could make. When Lily's father finally came looking for her, the girl was seated beside Annabelle at the teacher's desk, carefully copying letters onto a slate. "There you are, I've been searching all over," Mr. Mason said, relief evident in his voice. "I'm sorry if she's been bothering you, Miss Sawyer." "Not at all, Lily has been wonderful company," Annabelle assured him. "She's going to be an excellent student." After they left, Annabelle returned to her planning with renewed purpose. One child, at least, seemed excited about school, perhaps others would follow. She was so absorbed in her work that she didn't notice the approaching storm until the first drops of rain began to pelt the roof. Looking up in alarm, she realized the sky had turned an ominous gray-green, and the wind was picking up dramatically. As she hurried to close the windows, a tremendous crack of thunder shook the building, and the bell in the tower gave an eerie toll. The rain was coming down in sheets now, and Annabelle realized with dismay that she'd be drenched if she tried to make it back to the boarding house. That's when she heard it, a panicked whinny followed by the sound of hooves. Through the rain-streaked window, she saw a rider struggling to control a frightened horse. As she watched, a bolt of lightning struck a nearby tree, sending the horse into a frenzy. The rider was thrown, landing hard in the muddy road just as the spooked animal galloped away. Without thinking, Annabelle grabbed her shawl and rushed outside into the deluge. Beau tasted mud and blood as he pushed himself up from the ground. His shoulder screamed in pain, likely dislocated from the fall. Lightning flashed again, illuminating the empty road where his horse had been moments before, all his supplies, his rifle, and his cattle payment gone. "Are you hurt?" came a woman's voice through the downpour. He looked up to see a figure rushing toward him, shawl held uselessly over her head against the torrential rain. "My horse," he managed, trying to stand and wincing at the pain. "Never mind that now, can you walk? The schoolhouse is just there." She pointed to the building behind her, then offered her arm for support. Pride told him to refuse, but practicality won out. He leaned on her more heavily than he'd intended as they made their way to the shelter of the small building. Once inside, she immediately set about lighting a lantern and the small pot-bellied stove in the corner. Beau took in his surroundings, rows of desks, a chalkboard, shelves of books, and the woman who had helped him, now wringing water from her hair and skirts. She wasn't what anyone would call a beauty, at least not in the conventional sense. Her features were pleasant but unremarkable, her figure modest beneath the sodden blue dress. But there was a quiet confidence in the way she moved, a sense of purpose that caught his attention. "You're the new schoolteacher," he said, recognizing her from the farmer's description. "Yes, Annabelle Sawyer, and you're bleeding." She approached with a clean handkerchief, reaching toward his temple. Beau jerked back instinctively, unused to being touched. "I'm just going to clean the cut," she explained patiently, "and then we should see about your shoulder. It's sitting at an odd angle." "Dislocated," he confirmed. "I can set it if I have something to brace against." She assessed him with intelligent eyes that seemed to shift between green and brown in the lantern light. "The door frame should work. But first let me clean that cut." This time he remained still as she carefully dabbed at his temple. Her touch was gentle but efficient, with none of the coy flirtation he might have expected from other women in town. "I'm Beau Zachary," he offered, was bringing a cattle drive in when the storm hit. "Well, Mr. Zachary, it seems you've had quite the welcome to Cottonwood Creek." She stepped back, examining her handiwork. "Now about that shoulder." The next few minutes were excruciating as he positioned himself against the door frame, and she helped him maneuver the joint back into place. When it finally popped back with a sickening sound, he couldn't suppress a grunt of pain. "I'm sorry," she said, genuine concern in her voice. "Is there anything else I can do?" Beau shook his head, sweat beading on his forehead despite the chill of his wet clothes. "You've done plenty, more than most would." She smiled then, a transformation that caught him off guard. It wasn't that she suddenly became beautiful in any storybook sense, but her entire face lit up with warmth that made it impossible not to smile back. "I doubt that," she said. "Most people would help a man thrown from his horse in a lightning storm." "You'd be surprised," he replied, thinking of the hard lessons he'd learned about human nature over the years. Not everyone sees past their own concerns. The storm raged outside, rain lashing against the windows and thunder rolling across the sky. Inside, a strange sense of peace settled between them as Annabelle built up the fire and found a blanket to drape over his shoulders. "Your horse will probably head for town," she offered hopefully. "Animals seek shelter in storms like this. If I'm lucky, if not, I've lost everything I earned from this drive." He didn't mention that it represented nearly half a year's work. Annabelle sat at one of the student desks, her dress still damp but beginning to dry near the stove's heat. "May I ask what you plan to do with your earnings?" "Most cowboys I've encountered spend it all at the saloon before heading back out." "I'm not most cowboys," Beau said, a hint of defensiveness creeping into his voice. "I've got land southwest of here, building it up bit by bit. This money was meant for fencing and maybe a few more head of cattle." She nodded thoughtfully. A man with a plan, then, that's more than many can claim. Something in her simple acceptance of his ambitions, free of judgment or mockery, made Beau feel oddly seen in a way he rarely experienced. Most people in town viewed him as just another cowboy passing through, or as the orphaned son of Jacob Zachary who died with a bullet in his chest. "What about you?" he asked, surprising himself with his interest. "What brings a schoolteacher all the way out here from back east?" "Oh, I'm not from as far east as people assume," Annabelle said with a small laugh. "Just Missouri, and I came for the same reason as most, I suppose, opportunity. A chance to build something of my own." Before he could respond, the schoolhouse door burst open, and 3 men rushed in, water streaming from their rain slickers. "Miss Sawyer." "You all right?" The oldest of them, sporting a sheriff's badge, looked between her and Beau with obvious suspicion. "I'm fine, Sheriff Davis," Annabelle assured him. "Mr. Zachary had an accident with his horse during the worst of the storm. I was just providing some shelter." The sheriff's eyes narrowed as he took in Beau's disheveled appearance and the blanket around his shoulders. "Zachary, you're running that herd that came in today." Beau nodded. "Was heading to the cattle pens when the storm hit. My horse bolted with all my gear, including the payment for the cattle." "Well, that's a stroke of bad luck," the sheriff said, not sounding particularly sympathetic. "Miss Sawyer, Mrs. Hollister sent us to check on you when you didn't return to the boarding house. It's not proper for a lady to be alone with a man like this." The implication in his tone was clear, and Beau felt a surge of indignation on Annabelle's behalf. Before he could speak, however, she rose to her feet with quiet dignity. "I appreciate Mrs. Hollister's concern, Sheriff, but as you can see, this was merely a case of offering Christian charity during an emergency. Now that you're here, perhaps you gentlemen could help Mr. Zachary locate his horse and belongings." Her polite but firm response impressed Beau. She neither apologized nor appeared flustered by the insinuation. The sheriff huffed but nodded. "Palmer, go check the livery. See if any stray horses turned up there. Jenkins, you take Miss Sawyer back to the boarding house. I'll help Zachary here get sorted." As Annabelle gathered her things, she cast a final glance at Beau. "I hope you find your horse, Mr. Zachary. Perhaps I'll see you at the town social this Sunday. We're celebrating the start of the school year." "Maybe," Beau replied noncommittally, though something in him was already planning to attend. After she left with Jenkins, the sheriff turned to Beau with a hard stare. "Word of advice, cowboy, that woman's got a respectable position in this town. Don't go getting any ideas, she ain't for the likes of you." Beau matched his stare. "Seems to me that's for Miss Sawyer to decide, not you or anyone else." The sheriff snorted. "She's a plain little thing with book learning and not much else. Half the town's already betting on how long she'll last before heading home. Other half's waiting to see if old Jenkins will offer for her, seeing as he's been widowed 3 years and needs a mother for his young ones." Beau said nothing, but inside, a seed of anger took root at how quickly this town had judged a woman who had shown him nothing but kindness. By Sunday, Annabelle had settled into a routine at the boarding house, and had prepared the schoolhouse for the coming term. When she arrived at the town hall for the social, she was pleased to see many families already gathered, with children playing and adults chatting in clusters. Mrs. Hollister, the boarding house owner and self-appointed guardian of town morals, immediately descended upon her. "Miss Sawyer, do come meet the Reverend Watson. He's been most eager to make your acquaintance." She guided Annabelle toward a thin man with spectacles who smiled benevolently. "Miss Sawyer, a pleasure. I understand you'll be molding our young minds starting tomorrow." "That's the plan, Reverend," Annabelle replied with a smile, "though I suspect they'll teach me as much as I teach them." As they chatted about the school curriculum, Annabelle couldn't help noticing the door each time it opened, wondering if Beau Zachary would make an appearance. She told herself it was merely concern for his welfare after his accident, but something else tugged at her. A curiosity about the cowboy with the thoughtful eyes who spoke of building something permanent in a place where most men were just passing through. An hour into the social, she found herself cornered by Elias Jenkins, a solemn man in his 40s with 3 children ranging from 4 to 10 years old. He was polite but reserved as he inquired about her teaching methods and whether she'd be including practical skills in her lessons. "Children need to know how to survive out here," he insisted. "Reading poetry won't help a boy mend a fence or a girl preserve food for winter." "I believe in a balanced education, Mr. Jenkins," Annabelle replied diplomatically. "Literature expands the mind, but practical application gives purpose to knowledge." He nodded approvingly. "A sensible approach. My Martha always said much the same before she passed." Annabelle expressed her condolences, painfully aware of the speculative glances from the townswomen nearby. She had already overheard whispers suggesting Jenkins was looking her over as a potential mother for his children. The idea wasn't entirely unappealing from a practical standpoint. Jenkins was respected, owned good land, and his children seemed well-behaved. A teacher with no family connections could do far worse than to marry a stable widower, yet the thought of such a pragmatic union left her feeling hollow. She was rescued from further matchmaking by the arrival of her first student, Lily, who excitedly introduced her to other children. As they discussed their expectations for school, the door opened once more, and this time Beau Zachary stepped through. He'd cleaned up considerably since their meeting during the storm. His dark hair was neatly combed, his face freshly shaved, and he wore a pressed shirt with his best jeans and boots. He stood just inside the door, hat in hand, scanning the room until his eyes met hers. Annabelle felt an unexpected flutter in her chest as he nodded in acknowledgement. She excused herself from the children and made her way toward him. "Mr. Zachary, I'm glad to see you recovered from your ordeal," she said. "Did you find your horse?" "I did, thanks to the sheriff's men." "The saddlebags with my money were still attached, though somewhat worse for wear." He offered a small smile. "I owe you thanks for your help that day." "Anyone would have done the same," she demurred. "Not anyone," he insisted, then glanced around the room. "This is quite the gathering." "It's to welcome the new school year," she explained, "though I suspect it's really just an excuse for everyone to gather and gossip." His lips quirked upward. "And what are they gossiping about tonight?" "Oh, the usual, I imagine. Cattle prices, the railroad schedule, and whether the new schoolteacher will end up an old maid or married to widower Jenkins by Christmas." She surprised herself with her candor, but something about Beau invited honesty. He frowned. "The town seems mighty concerned with your future for people who barely know you." "Small towns run on speculation and expectation," Annabelle said with a philosophical shrug. "I'm used to it." Before he could respond, Mrs. Hollister appeared at her elbow. "Miss Sawyer, the Reverend is about to say grace before the meal." Her gaze flickered dismissively over Beau. "Mr. Zachary, I didn't expect to see you here. I thought your cattle drive would have you heading back to your property by now." The way she said property made it clear she didn't consider Beau's small ranch worthy of the name. "Had some business to finish in town," Beau replied evenly. "Thought I'd pay my respects to Miss Sawyer before heading out tomorrow." "How considerate," Mrs. Hollister said with evident skepticism. "Well, Miss Sawyer, do come along, Mr. Jenkins has saved you a seat at his table." Annabelle hesitated, then turned to Beau. "Would you care to join us for the meal, Mr. Zachary?" The surprise on both Beau's and Mrs. Hollister's faces was almost comical. "I wouldn't want to impose," Beau said carefully. "Nonsense, there's plenty of food and I'd appreciate hearing more about ranching in the area, My students will be from all kinds of families and I should understand their backgrounds. Annabelle stood her ground, ignoring Mrs. Hollister's tight-lipped disapproval. Something shifted in Beau's expression, a mixture of appreciation and respect that warmed her more than it should have. In that case, I'd be honored. The meal that followed was a study in social dynamics. Annabelle found herself seated between Mr. Jenkins and Beau, with Mrs. Hollister directly across from her, watching every interaction with hawkish attention. The conversation flowed stiltedly at first, with Jenkins speaking about the coming harvest and Mrs. Hollister interjecting frequent reminders of town events that Annabelle simply must attend. But when Lily Mason asked Beau about his horses, the cowboy's reserved manner melted away as he described the different temperaments of his animals and how he trained them. Soon several children had gathered around, peppering him with questions that he answered with surprising patience. "You have a way with children, Mr. Zachary," Annabelle observed as the meal wound down. "Just telling them the truth," he replied. "Kids know when you're spinning tales, they deserve straight answers." "My sentiment exactly, it's why I became a teacher." She smiled, and for a moment the crowded hall seemed to fade away as they shared an understanding that needed no words. The moment was broken by Jenkins clearing his throat. "Miss Sawyer, I was hoping you might consider coming to dinner at my home next week. The children would benefit from getting to know their teacher better before classes begin." Annabelle turned to him with a polite smile. "That's very kind, Mr. Jenkins. I'd be happy to visit." Mrs. Hollister beamed approvingly while casting a triumphant glance at Beau, who remained impassive. As the evening drew to a close, Beau helped Annabelle into her shawl near the door. "I'll be heading back to my ranch tomorrow," he said quietly. "Got fencing to mend and preparations for winter to make." "Of course," Annabelle nodded, ignoring the unexpected pang of disappointment. "It was good of you to come tonight." He hesitated, then added, "I'll be bringing some cattle to market in about a month. Perhaps I'll see you then." "Perhaps," she echoed, surprised by how much she hoped it would be true. As she walked back to the boarding house with Mrs. Hollister and two other ladies, their conversation inevitably turned to her interactions during the evening. "Mr. Jenkins is quite taken with you," Mrs. Hollister declared. "A very respectable man, widowed under the most tragic circumstances. His poor Martha caught fever 3 winters ago. Left him with those 3 young ones to raise alone." "He seems like a devoted father," Annabelle acknowledged. "And what of that cowboy?" asked Mrs. Parker, another boarder. "Bold of him to attend a town social." "Those drifter types usually stick to the saloon." "Mr. Zachary isn't a drifter," Annabelle corrected mildly. "He has a small ranch southwest of town." Mrs. Hollister sniffed. "A few acres and a handful of cattle hardly makes a ranch." "Jacob Zachary never amounted to much, always chasing one scheme or another until he got himself killed. The son seems cut from the same cloth, full of big talk about building something, but mark my words, he'll either move on when times get hard or end up just as dead." The casual cruelty of the assessment stung Annabelle more than it should have. "I found Mr. Zachary to be quite thoughtful and hardworking. Not everyone begins with advantages, Mrs. Hollister." "My dear," the older woman patted her arm condescendingly, "you're new here and haven't learned to judge character as we have. A pretty face and strong shoulders don't make a man worthy of a respectable woman's attention. Now, Mr. Jenkins, there's a man of substance." Annabelle fell silent, realizing any defense of Beau would only fuel more gossip. But inside, a quiet rebellion took root. These women knew nothing of her heart or her judgments, yet they presumed to dictate both. Tomorrow she would begin teaching, focusing on the work she had come to do. As for Beau Zachary and Elias Jenkins and the town's expectations, those were complications she would deal with as they arose. 1 month stretched into 2, and autumn painted the countryside in brilliant hues of red and gold. Annabelle found her rhythm with the 23 students who attended her school, ranging from 5-year-old Tommy Parker to 16-year-old George Jenkins, who needed to finish his education before taking on more responsibilities at his father's farm. She had indeed visited the Jenkins home for dinner, finding it well kept but lacking warmth. The children were obedient but reserved, and Jenkins himself, while unfailingly polite, seemed to view her more as a potential solution to his domestic situation than as a woman with her own dreams and desires. "The children need a mother's touch," he had said as he walked her back to town afterward, "and a woman alone on the frontier faces many hardships that a husband's protection could prevent." Annabelle had thanked him for his concern without committing to anything further, earning her reproachful glances from Mrs. Hollister in the days that followed. The town had largely accepted her as their teacher, though she remained an object of speculation rather than a fully integrated member of the community. The children, however, had embraced her completely, especially after she organized a harvest festival where they presented their learning to the town through recitations, mathematics competitions, and displays of maps and scientific principles they had studied. "You've worked wonders with them," Reverend Watson told her after the presentation. "Even the Jensen boys are behaving, and their father was ready to give them up as lost causes." Annabelle glowed with pride at the progress her students had made, yet in quiet moments, she found her thoughts drifting to Beau Zachary. He hadn't returned to town as he'd suggested he might, and she told herself it was merely professional curiosity that made her ask passing cowboys if they'd seen him. Zachary. "Yeah, he's holed up at his place getting ready for winter," one trail hand informed her. "Lost some cattle to wolves last month. Hit him hard, I heard." The news troubled her, but there was nothing she could do. Her place was here, teaching the town's children and gradually earning her place in the community. Then came the first snowfall of the season, earlier than expected and heavier than usual for November. School was canceled as the blizzard raged for 3 days, leaving drifts taller than a man in some places. When it finally cleared, the town began the process of digging out. Annabelle was helping shovel the path to the schoolhouse when she heard a commotion at the edge of town. A rider was approaching, slumped in his saddle, his horse struggling through the deep snow. As the figure drew closer, she recognized the broad shoulders and dark hair of Beau Zachary, though he looked nothing like the confident cowboy she remembered. His face was haggard, his clothes worn and inadequate for the bitter cold. When his horse stopped near the general store, he nearly fell from the saddle, catching himself at the last moment. "Need supplies," he managed, his voice hoarse. "Lost my cabin in the storm." Roof collapsed under the snow. Several men hurried forward to help him dismount, including Sheriff Davis. Annabelle abandoned her shovel and rushed over. "Get him inside," ordered the sheriff. "Mason, start a fire in your back room." They half-carried Beau into the general store, where Mr. Mason quickly cleared a space near the pot-bellied stove. Annabelle followed, concern overriding propriety. "What happened?" she asked as they settled Beau on a chair, and someone pressed a cup of coffee into his shaking hands. Beau's eyes found hers, recognition dawning through his exhaustion. "Miss Sawyer," he acknowledged, then addressed the men gathered around. "Storm hit without warning out my way, woke up to the sound of the roof beams cracking. Barely got out before the whole thing came down. Lost most of my supplies in the collapse." "What about your livestock?" asked Mason. "Got the horses into the lean-to in time." "It held. Cattle are scattered but probably alive. They know how to find shelter." He took a shuddering breath. "Need to get supplies and head back. Can't leave them long." "You're in no condition to go anywhere," Sheriff Davis said gruffly. "Mason, outfit him with what he needs on credit. He can stay at the jail tonight." "I can pay," Beau insisted, reaching for a pouch at his belt. "Save it," Davis replied. "You'll need every penny to rebuild." Annabelle watched the exchange with surprise. The sheriff who had been so dismissive of Beau months ago now showed unexpected compassion. "The school has a pot-bellied stove and cots from when we housed the circuit preacher last month," Annabelle suggested. "It would be more comfortable than the jail." All eyes turned to her, and she realized too late how her offer might be interpreted. "That's hardly appropriate, Miss Sawyer, Mrs. Hollister said from the doorway, having arrived to witness the scene. "A single woman offering lodging to a man, what would the parents of your students think?" Annabelle straightened her shoulders. "I wasn't suggesting I stay there with him, Mrs. Hollister, merely that the schoolhouse is better equipped for a guest than the jail cell." Beau struggled to his feet. "I appreciate the offer, but the sheriff's right. I need rest tonight, then I have to get back to my ranch tomorrow." "What's left of it?" "Alone in this weather," Annabelle couldn't hide her concern. "That seems foolhardy, Mr. Zachary." A ghost of his old smile touched his lips. "Wouldn't be the first foolhardy thing I've done, Miss Sawyer." Sheriff Davis settled the matter by declaring that Beau would stay at the jail, where he could keep an eye on him and ensure he was fit to travel before letting him leave. Mason agreed to extend credit for the supplies he would need. As the men helped Beau toward the door, he paused beside Annabelle. "Thank you for your concern," he said quietly. "It means more than you might think." That night, Annabelle lay awake in her bed at the boarding house, troubled by thoughts of Beau returning alone to his collapsed cabin. The frontier was merciless to those without shelter in winter. A man could freeze to death in hours if another storm blew in. By morning, she had made a decision that would shock the town and possibly end her career as their schoolteacher, but some risks, she decided, were worth taking. Beau loaded the last of his supplies onto the packhorse, his body still aching from the ordeal of the past few days. The sheriff watched with obvious skepticism. "You sure about this, Zachary?" No shame in waiting out the worst of winter in town, could find work at the livery. Beau shook his head. "My cattle are out there, what's left of my life is out there, I'm not giving up now." The truth was more complex than he wanted to admit. Failure had never been an option for him, not since he'd buried his parents and set out to build something lasting in their memory. His small ranch represented every hard lesson, every sacrifice, every moment of back-breaking work he'd endured. To abandon it now would be to abandon himself. "Then God go with you," the sheriff said, extending his hand. "You're a stubborn fool, but a determined one, I'll give you that." Beau shook the offered hand, nodding his thanks. As he turned to mount his horse, he heard the unmistakable sound of wagon wheels on packed snow. Looking up, he was astonished to see Annabelle Sawyer driving a small wagon toward them, bundled against the cold in a heavy coat and wool scarf. "Miss Sawyer," Sheriff Davis called, "what are you doing out here so early? School's still canceled until the paths are clear." Annabelle pulled the wagon to a stop beside them. "I know. I'm not here about school." She turned to Beau, her expression resolute. "Mr. Zachary, I understand you're returning to your ranch today." Beau nodded, bewildered by her appearance. "That's right." "Then I'd like to offer my assistance." She gestured to the wagon, which he now saw was loaded with additional supplies, blankets, tools, a small stove, and what appeared to be a canvas tent. "These are donations from several families in town. When they heard about your situation, they wanted to help." Beau stared at the supplies, then at Annabelle, stunned by this unexpected generosity. "Who?" "The Masons provided the tent. It belonged to their son, who moved to Denver last year. The blacksmith donated the small stove, and several families with children in my class contributed blankets and preserved food." She smiled slightly. "It seems you made an impression at the social." "Miss Sawyer has been quite persuasive on your behalf," the sheriff added dryly. "Spent half the night going door to door, from what I hear." Beau felt something constrict in his chest, an emotion he couldn't immediately identify. "I don't know what to say," he managed finally. "You don't need to say anything," Annabelle replied. "Just allow me to drive the wagon out to your ranch. The supplies are too much for your packhorse, and this way, I can help you set up temporary shelter before returning to town." "Absolutely not," the sheriff interjected. "Miss Sawyer, what you're proposing is completely inappropriate. A woman of your position traveling alone with a single man to his property, the school board would have your job by nightfall." "I'm not suggesting anything improper, Sheriff," Annabelle said calmly. "I'm offering Christian charity to a neighbor in need, as is my duty. I'll return before dark." Beau found his voice. "The sheriff's right, I appreciate what you've done, what everyone has done, but I can't let you risk your reputation or your position." "I'll make 2 trips if necessary." Annabelle's eyes flashed with a determination that surprised him. "Mr. Zachary, your ranch is 15 miles from town, in this snow with an injured man making multiple trips that could take days. Days you don't have if you want to salvage what's left and protect your livestock." Before either man could respond, another voice joined the conversation. "She's not going alone. I'll accompany them." They turned to see Elias Jenkins approaching, his own horse saddled and ready. "My oldest son can mind the younger children for the day. I've been meaning to check my western fence line anyway, which takes me in that direction." The look Jenkins gave Beau was impossible to misinterpret. It was the territorial assessment of one man sizing up a potential rival. "There," Annabelle said with satisfaction. "A perfect solution. Mr. Jenkins will ensure all propriety is maintained, and Mr. Zachary will receive the help he needs." The sheriff looked between the three of them, then shrugged. "On your own heads be it then. But Miss Sawyer, I expect you back in town by sunset, or I'll come looking for you myself." As they set out, the wagon following Beau's lead with Jenkins riding alongside, an uncomfortable silence settled over them. Beau was acutely aware of the debt he now owed, not just to Annabelle but to Jenkins and the townspeople who had contributed supplies. For a man who had prided himself on self-reliance, it was a humbling position. The journey was slow and arduous, the snow-covered trail requiring careful navigation. By midday, they reached the rise that overlooked Beau's small valley, and he felt his heart sink at the sight below. His cabin was indeed a wreck, the roof entirely caved in and one wall collapsed outward. The corral fence was damaged in several places, though the linta where he'd sheltered his horses still stood. In the distance, he could make out dark shapes against the snow. Some of his cattle had returned to their familiar grazing grounds. "It's not as bad as it could be," Jenkins offered, surprisingly gentle. "The barn structure is still sound. We can set up the tent inside it for better protection." Annabelle had been quiet during the journey, but now she spoke up. "Where did you build your cabin, Mr. Zachary? The location might be important when you rebuild." Beau pointed to the collapsed structure. "My father started it there because it was sheltered from the north winds by that ridge. Never had trouble before." "The snowdrift came from the east this time," Jenkins observed. "Unusual for this region. When you rebuild, you might consider a different placement." The next several hours passed in focused activity. Jenkins proved surprisingly helpful, using his practical knowledge to secure the tent inside the barn and set up the small stove safely. Beau, despite his injuries, managed to repair the worst breaks in the corral fence, while Annabelle organized the supplies and prepared a hot meal from the provisions she'd brought. As they sat inside the tent, warmed by the small stove and satisfying their hunger with Annabelle's simple but hearty stew, Beau found himself studying the unusual woman who had upended the town's expectations by coming to his aid. "Why did you do this?" he finally asked. "You barely know me." Annabelle considered the question seriously. "I believe we reveal our true character not through words but through actions. When someone needs help, providing it isn't charity, it's humanity." "Most would say you're risking too much for a man with uncertain prospects," Jenkins commented, his tone neutral but his meaning clear. "Perhaps," she acknowledged. "But I make my own judgments about risks worth taking." The simple statement held a quiet defiance that Beau found himself admiring. This woman, who the town had dismissed as plain and unremarkable, possessed a strength of character and clarity of purpose that outshone many men he'd known. As the afternoon waned, Jenkins stood and announced it was time to return to town. "We've done what we came to do. The shelter is secure, and Zachary has what he needs to survive until he can rebuild properly." Annabelle nodded, gathering her coat and gloves. "Will you be all right here, Mr. Zachary? It's not too late to reconsider and return to town until the weather improves." Beau shook his head. "This is where I belong, but I won't forget what you've done." He hesitated, then added, "What all of you have done." Jenkins acknowledged this with a curt nod. "Neighbors help neighbors out here. That's the code of the frontier." As they prepared to leave, Beau walked with Annabelle to the wagon. "I don't have much to offer in return for your kindness," he said quietly. "But when I get back on my feet, I'd like to repay you somehow." She smiled, her hazel eyes warm despite the biting cold. "Then come to the Christmas pageant at the school next month. The children have been practicing for weeks, and it would mean a lot to them to have a full audience." "I'll be there," he promised, meaning it more than she could know. As he watched the wagon and Jenkins' horse disappear over the ridge, Beau felt something shift within him, a crack in the wall he'd built around himself since his parents' deaths. The belief that he needed no one, that attachments were dangerous on the frontier, suddenly seemed less certain than it had before. He turned back to his damaged ranch, surveying what remained and what was lost. For the first time in years, he found himself thinking beyond mere survival, beyond simply enduring from one season to the next. He found himself wondering what it might be like to build something not just for himself, but to share. The Christmas pageant was scheduled for the evening of December 20th, just before the school's holiday break. Annabelle had thrown herself into preparations, helping the children create costumes, learn their lines, and practice the carols they would sing for the town. It was partly to give her students a sense of accomplishment, but also, she admitted to herself, to keep her mind occupied and away from thoughts of Beau Zachary. In the weeks since their expedition to his ranch, she had faced the expected whispers and scrutiny from the town. Mrs. Hollister had been particularly vocal about the impropriety of her actions, though the presence of Elias Jenkins had muted the worst of the gossip. The school board had called a special meeting to discuss the matter, but ultimately decided that her dedication to helping a community member in distress showed Christian values they wished to encourage. Jenkins himself had been a more frequent visitor to the schoolhouse, often arriving just as classes ended to escort her back to the boarding house. His intentions were increasingly clear, though he had not yet formally declared them. "The children speak highly of you," he told her one evening as they walked through town. "Even George, who initially resisted returning to school, has found value in your lessons." "I'm glad," Annabelle replied. "Your children are bright and hardworking. You should be proud of them." "I am," he paused, choosing his next words carefully. "They need stability and guidance, as do I in many ways. A household without a woman's touch is incomplete." Annabelle recognized the direction of the conversation and gently steered it elsewhere. "The Christmas pageant is coming together nicely. I hope you and the children will attend." If Jenkins was disappointed by her deflection, he didn't show it. Of course, we wouldn't miss it. As the night of the pageant arrived, the schoolhouse was transformed with pine boughs, candles, and paper stars crafted by the students. The desks had been pushed back against the walls to create space for the performance, and benches borrowed from the church provided seating for the audience. Parents and townspeople filed in, filling the room with cheerful chatter and anticipation. Annabelle, dressed in her best blue dress with a white lace collar, moved among them, greeting families and calming nervous children. She tried not to glance at the door too often, but as the scheduled start time approached with no sign of Beau, she couldn't help a twinge of disappointment. Perhaps the journey had been too difficult in the winter conditions, or his responsibilities at the ranch had kept him away. "Shall we begin, Miss Sawyer?" Reverend Watson asked, noting the crowded room. Annabelle nodded, pushing aside her disappointment. "Yes, I think we're ready." The children took their places, and Lily Mason stepped forward to deliver the opening lines of welcome. Just as she began to speak, the door opened, admitting a blast of cold air and a tall figure bundled against the winter night. Beau slipped in quietly, removing his hat as he found a place to stand at the back of the room. His eyes met Annabelle's across the crowded space, and he offered a small nod that sent an inexplicable warmth through her despite the draft from the door. The pageant proceeded beautifully, with even the youngest children remembering their parts and the older ones delivering their lines with convincing emotion. When the final carol concluded and the audience burst into applause, Annabelle felt a surge of pride in her students that brought tears to her eyes. As parents congratulated their children and enjoyed the refreshments provided by the ladies' auxiliary, Annabelle finally had a moment to make her way to where Beau stood, still near the back of the room. "You came," she said simply. "I promised I would." He looked better than when she'd last seen him, the haunted exhaustion replaced by his usual quiet strength, though new lines of hardship marked his face. The children did well. "You must be a good teacher." "They did all the work," she demurred. "How are things at your ranch?" "Improving. The tent has held, and I've salvaged enough material from the cabin to start rebuilding once the weather breaks. Lost some cattle, but not as many as I feared." He hesitated, then added, "I came to town for supplies, but also to repay some of what I owe to those who helped me." "No repayment is necessary," she assured him. "Maybe not, but it's important to me." His gaze was steady, searching her face as if looking for something. "I also wanted to see you again." The simple admission caught her off guard, warming her cheeks. Before she could respond, Elias Jenkins appeared at her side, his children in tow. "Miss Sawyer, the pageant was a triumph," he said formally. "The children have something for you." His youngest daughter shyly presented Annabelle with a small wrapped package. "Merry Christmas, Miss Sawyer." "Thank you, Emily, how thoughtful." Annabelle knelt to accept the gift, touched by the gesture. When she straightened, she found Jenkins and Beau regarding each other with barely concealed tension. "Zachary," Jenkins acknowledged, "didn't expect to see you in town so soon." "Had business to attend to," Beau replied evenly. "Your children performed well tonight." "Yes, they have flourished under Miss Sawyer's guidance." Jenkins placed a proprietary hand on his son's shoulder. "We value her greatly in this community." The implication was clear. Jenkins considered himself part of Annabelle's established circle, while Beau remained an outsider. Annabelle, unwilling to let the moment turn uncomfortable, smiled at both men. "I'm fortunate to have the support of so many in Cottonwood Creek. It's what makes a community strong, everyone contributing what they can." As the evening drew to a close, Annabelle found herself torn between conflicting emotions. Jenkins had made his intentions increasingly clear, offering stability, respect, and a ready-made family. It was the sensible choice, the one the town expected her to make. Yet as she watched Beau prepare to leave, pulling on his gloves and settling his hat on his dark hair, she felt a pull toward something less defined but somehow more vital. Mr. Zachary, she called, hurrying to catch him before he left. Will you be in town for Christmas? He shook his head. Need to get back to the ranch, still too much to do. Of course, she hesitated, then added impulsively, I've been collecting books for the school library. If you'd like to borrow any for the winter evenings, you'd be welcome to. Something in his expression softened. I'd like that, haven't had much chance for reading these past years. Come by tomorrow before you leave town, then. The school will be open in the morning. As she watched him walk away into the snowy night, Annabelle was acutely aware of Jenkins observing their exchange from across the room. She had inadvertently set something in motion that would soon require a resolution. The following morning, Beau arrived at the schoolhouse just as Annabelle was arranging the new books she had ordered from Denver. The sight of him in the doorway, hat in hand with snow dusting his shoulders, made her heart beat a little faster than she cared to admit. Good morning, Mr. Zachary. Please come in out of the cold. He stepped inside, stomping the snow from his boots. Don't want to track a mess into your schoolhouse. A little snow won't hurt, she assured him, gesturing to the bookshelves. These are our current offerings. Most are educational texts, but we have some literature as well. Dickens, Twain, a bit of Shakespeare. Beau approached the shelves with unexpected reverence, running his fingers along the spines. My mother used to read to us in the evenings, had a fondness for poetry. Wordsworth, I think. We have a collection of romantic poets, Annabelle said, pleased by his interest. She selected a volume and offered it to him. This includes Wordsworth, Coleridge, Byron, and Shelley. He accepted the book carefully, as if it were made of precious material rather than paper and binding. Been a long time since I had anything but cattle records to read. Take some others as well, she encouraged. The winter evenings are long, and books are good companions. As he selected a few more volumes, including a collection of American frontier tales and a practical guide to animal husbandry, Annabelle found herself studying his profile, the strong line of his jaw, the thoughtful concentration in his eyes as he read titles. He was handsome, yes, but it was more than that. There was a depth to him that called to something in her. Miss Sawyer, he said abruptly, closing the book in his hands, I'm not good with words like these authors. But I want you to know what your help meant to me. Not just the supplies or the tent, but the fact that you saw someone who needed help and didn't look away. As I said before, anyone would have. No, he interrupted gently. Not anyone. Most people in this town wrote me off long ago as a lost cause, just like my father. You were the only one who looked at me and saw something worth saving. The raw honesty in his voice caught at her heart. I think perhaps you underestimate your worth, Mr. Zachary. Beau, he said, my name is Beau, and I've spent most of my life believing that the only way to survive out here is to need nothing and no one. That attachments are just vulnerabilities waiting to be exploited by a harsh world. And now, she asked softly, now I'm not so sure, he met her gaze directly. The night my cabin collapsed, I thought I'd lost everything. But what scared me most wasn't losing the structure or even the cattle. It was the thought of facing the rebuilding alone. Annabelle felt the conversation shifting into territory that both thrilled and frightened her. Mr. Zachary, Beau, what are you saying? Before he could answer, the schoolhouse door opened again, admitting Elias Jenkins with a purposeful stride. He stopped short at the sight of them standing close together among the bookshelves, his expression hardening. Miss Sawyer. I came to escort you to the Christmas committee meeting at the church. His eyes flicked to the books in Beau's hands. I see you're busy with library matters. Mr. Jenkins, yes, I'd nearly forgotten the meeting. Annabelle stepped back, flustered by the interruption and the charged moment it had broken. Mr. Zachary was just borrowing some books for the winter. Jenkins nodded stiffly. A worthwhile pursuit. Education elevates us all. Despite his words, his tone suggested he found Beau's presence less than welcome. Beau gathered the books, his expression closing off. I appreciate the loan, Miss Sawyer. I'll return them when I'm next in town. There's no hurry, she assured him. Enjoy them. As Beau moved toward the door, Jenkins stepped aside to let him pass, then turned back to Annabelle with a determined air. Miss Sawyer, Annabelle, before we go to the meeting, there's something I wish to discuss with you. The formality of his tone and the resolute set of his jaw told her exactly what was coming. Elias Jenkins was about to propose marriage, spurred to action by Beau's presence and whatever he had sensed between them. In that moment, standing amid her books with two very different futures suddenly presenting themselves, Annabelle Sawyer realized that the plain, sensible schoolteacher who had arrived in Cottonwood Creek months ago was not the same woman who stood there now. Something had awakened in her, a desire not just for security or acceptance, but for genuine connection, for the kind of understanding she had glimpsed in Beau's eyes. The journey back to his ranch gave Beau plenty of time to think, the borrowed books carefully protected inside his saddlebags. He had come so close to saying more to Annabelle before Jenkins interrupted, perhaps too close. What right did he have, after all, to complicate her life? Jenkins could offer her respectability, stability, a place in the community. All Beau had was a half-collapsed cabin and an uncertain future. Yet he couldn't forget the way she had looked at him in the schoolhouse, with an understanding that went beyond pity or charitable concern. As if she truly saw him, not the orphan son of Jacob Zachary or the struggling rancher, but the man beneath it all. The week between his visit to town and Christmas Day passed in a blur of labor. Beau worked from dawn until dusk, securing his remaining cattle, reinforcing the barn where he'd set up temporary quarters, and beginning to clear the debris from his collapsed cabin. The physical exertion helped quiet his mind, though in the evenings, by lantern light, he found himself turning to the books Annabelle had lent him. The poetry his mother had loved spoke to him differently now than it had in childhood. He found himself lingering over Wordsworth's reflections on nature and human connection, recognizing his own solitary existence in some passages and finding unexpected yearning in others. On Christmas morning, he paused his work to observe the holiday in his own quiet way. He hadn't celebrated properly in years, but today he found himself remembering family traditions, the small gifts his mother had always managed to provide, the special meal they would share, the prayers his father would offer despite not being a particularly religious man. As he sat beside his small stove with a cup of coffee, gazing out at the snow-covered landscape of his ranch, Beau was struck by the beauty of his land. It was harsh, yes, but also full of possibility. For the first time, he allowed himself to imagine what it might be like to share it with someone who could see that same possibility. The sound of approaching hooves pulled him from his reverie. Visitors were rare, especially on Christmas Day and in such weather. He stepped outside, hand instinctively moving to the revolver at his hip, and squinted against the bright winter sun reflecting off the snow. A single rider was approaching from the direction of town. As the figure drew closer, Beau's heart began to pound when he recognized the blue coat and light brown hair partially covered by a woolen scarf. Annabelle Sawyer was riding toward his ranch on Christmas Day. He moved forward to meet her, still disbelieving the evidence of his own eyes. "Miss Sawyer, what are you doing out here?" She reined in her horse, her cheeks flushed from the cold and perhaps something more. "Merry Christmas, Mr. Zachary. I hope I'm not intruding." "No, not at all, but the journey must have been difficult, and on Christmas." She dismounted with practiced ease that surprised him, revealing another side to the prim schoolteacher he had come to know. "The weather is clear, and the trail you broke made the way easier to follow. As for Christmas, well, I thought perhaps you might like some company for the holiday." She reached into her saddlebag and produced a small package wrapped in brown paper and tied with string. "And to deliver this, it isn't much, but every home needs some brightness at Christmas." Beau accepted the package with hands that weren't quite steady. "You shouldn't have ridden all this way alone. It's dangerous. Sheriff Davis knows where I've gone. And I'm more capable than the town gives me credit for." There was a hint of defiance in her voice. "I grew up on a farm in Missouri. I can handle a horse and a rifle if needed." Beau found himself smiling despite his concern. "I'm beginning to see that, Miss Sawyer. Please, come inside where it's warm." He led her to the barn where he'd set up his temporary quarters. The canvas tent was secured inside the larger structure, with the small stove providing heat. He had made efforts to create some order in his reduced circumstances, with a cot covered in clean blankets, a small table fashioned from salvaged boards, and a trunk containing his few possessions. "It's not much," he said, suddenly self-conscious about the humble surroundings. "It's practical and resourceful," Annabelle replied, removing her gloves and warming her hands by the stove. "You've made good use of what was available." Her lack of judgment eased something in his chest. "Would you like coffee? It's about all I can offer in the way of hospitality." "Coffee would be wonderful." As he prepared the drink, Annabelle looked around with interest rather than pity. Have you made plans for rebuilding? Yes, once spring comes, I'm thinking of positioning the new cabin further up the slope with better protection from all directions. He handed her a cup of the strong, black coffee, but that's months away. For now, this is home. She accepted the cup with a grateful nod. Aren't you going to open your gift? Beau had almost forgotten the package she had given him. He untied the string carefully and unfolded the brown paper to reveal a hand-knitted scarf in deep blue wool. I noticed your old one was rather worn, she explained. This is wool from Widow Preston's sheep. She taught me to knit this fall. It's perfect, he said, genuinely touched by the practical yet personal gift. Thank you. You're welcome, she sipped her coffee then set it aside. Mr. Zachary, Beau, there's another reason I came today. Something in her tone made him pay close attention. What is it? Mr. Jenkins asked me to marry him. The day you left town after you visited the school. The words hit Beau like a physical blow, though he'd half expected them. Of course Jenkins would propose. Any sensible man would want Annabelle for his wife. She was intelligent, kind, and possessed a quiet strength that would serve her well on the frontier. Congratulations, he managed, though the word tasted bitter. He's a respectable man. His children seem well raised. I haven't given him an answer yet. Annabelle's eyes held his, unwavering. Beau went very still. Why not? Because before I commit to a future, I need to be certain I'm choosing it for the right reasons. Not out of practicality or to meet the town's expectations, but because it's truly where my heart leads me. She took a deep breath. Before Mr. Jenkins interrupted us that day in the schoolhouse, you were about to say something. I think I need to hear what it was before I can give him my answer. The moment stretched between them, fraught with possibility and danger. Beau knew that what he said next could change everything for better or worse. I was going to say that meeting you has made me question everything I thought I knew about surviving out here. He spoke slowly, choosing each word with care. I convinced myself that independence was the only way to be safe. That needing no one meant never being disappointed or abandoned. He moved closer to her, close enough to see the flecks of gold in her hazel eyes. But then you showed up at my ranch with a wagon full of help and not a hint of pity in your eyes. You saw me at my lowest point and still treated me with dignity. And I realized that maybe true strength isn't about standing alone, but about being brave enough to reach for connection, even knowing it might not last. What are you saying, Beau? She asked softly. I'm saying that I have nothing to offer you that Jenkins can't provide better. I have no position in town, no ready-made family, no comfortable home, just a piece of land, some cattle, and a dream that seems further away than ever after the storm. He paused, gathering courage for what came next. But I also have a heart that sees you, not as the plain schoolteacher the town dismisses, but as the extraordinary woman who rides 15 miles alone on Christmas Day to bring a scarf to a man who's lost almost everything. Annabelle's eyes filled with tears, though she didn't look away. The town has already decided who I am and what my future should be. They looked at me the day I arrived and saw nothing remarkable, nothing worth considering beyond my usefulness as a teacher or a potential wife for a widower. They were wrong, Beau said simply. So were they wrong about you? She reached out, hesitantly placing her hand on his arm. They see a struggling rancher following in his father's footsteps toward failure. I see a man who faces each setback with determination and dignity. A man who reads Wordsworth by lamplight after working from dawn until dusk. The touch of her hand burned through the fabric of his sleeve. Annabelle, what I'm trying to say badly is that I believe I'm falling in love with you. And that terrifies me because I have so little to give you compared to what you deserve. The words hung in the air between them, impossible to take back. Beau waited, barely breathing, for her response. Do you know what Mr. Jenkins said when he proposed? She asked, surprising him with the question. He said I was sensible and good with children, that his household needed a woman's touch, and that we could have a comfortable life together. She stepped closer. Not once did he mention love or seeing me for who I truly am. He offered me respectability and security, which are not small things on the frontier. But when I tried to imagine that life, all I could think about was whether you were warm enough in your tent, whether you were reading the books I'd lent you, whether you were facing each day alone. Hope, dangerous and fragile, began to unfurl in Beau's chest. What are you saying? I'm saying that I believe I'm falling in love with you too. Not with what you can provide or what the town thinks of you, but with the man who treats children with respect and handles books like treasures. The man who refuses to abandon his dream even when a storm takes almost everything. Her voice was steady despite the tears that now spilled onto her cheeks. And if that means facing disapproval from the town or building a life from scratch, then that's what I choose. For a moment Beau couldn't move, couldn't speak. Then slowly he reached up to brush the tears from her cheek, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. Are you certain life with me won't be easy? We'll have to rebuild everything. I've never been more certain of anything, she replied. We'll rebuild together. He leaned forward then, closing the distance between them, and kissed her with all the tenderness and hope he had kept buried for so long. Her arms came around him, her response erasing any lingering doubt. When they finally parted, Beau rested his forehead against hers. This isn't how I imagined spending Christmas, he admitted with a smile. But I can't think of a better gift. Nor I, she agreed. Though we have much to figure out, the town will talk. The school board may not approve of their teacher marrying a rancher of uncertain prospects. Then we'll face that together too. He straightened, a new determination filling him. I won't ask you to give up your teaching. It means too much to you. Perhaps we can find a way to make both work, your school and our ranch. The word "our" warmed her from within. Spring is still months away. We have time to plan, to prepare the town for the idea of us together. And to court properly, Beau added, you deserve to be wooed with more than desperate circumstances and confessions in a barn. Annabelle laughed, the sound bright in the winter quiet. I think we're well past conventional courtship, don't you? But yes, we'll observe the proprieties as much as we can. I'll give Mr. Jenkins my answer when I return to town, and then we can begin building our future, step by step. As the winter afternoon began to fade toward evening, they sat together by the small stove, making plans for a future neither had imagined possible just months before. When it came time for Annabelle to return to town before darkness made the journey dangerous, Beau insisted on accompanying her. Just to the edge of town, he said as they mounted their horses. I won't risk your reputation more than necessary. She smiled at him, radiant despite the cold. My reputation will survive. It's my heart I'm concerned with, and that, I think, is in very good hands. Spring 1880, Cottonwood Creek, Colorado Territory. The new schoolhouse gleamed white in the afternoon sun, its fresh paint a testament to the community effort that had raised it in just 3 weeks. The old building still stood nearby, but it would serve a new purpose now. A library for the town, with shelves already filling with books ordered from Denver and donations from families who had discovered the joy of reading through Annabelle's teaching. Annabelle stood on the steps, watching as children ran across the green field behind the school, playing games in the warm May sunshine. The last day of the school term had ended with a picnic celebration, and parents chatted in groups while enjoying the food everyone had contributed. Miss Sawyer, Lily Mason called, running up with a handful of wildflowers. Are these the ones you said we could press for our science projects next term? Yes, those are perfect, Annabelle confirmed, bending to examine the colorful blooms. Just remember to pick only a few from each area, so they'll grow back next year. I will, the girl promised, then lowered her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. Is Mr. Zachary coming today? Annabelle smiled. Yes, he should be here soon. He wanted to finish the fencing on the north pasture first. Lily nodded, satisfied, and ran back to join her friends. The children had taken to Beau with surprising enthusiasm after he had visited the school several times over the winter and spring to help with repairs and to teach a special lesson on ranching and cattle. Even George Jenkins, initially standoffish, had eventually sought Beau's advice on breaking a particularly stubborn colt. The months following their Christmas Day declarations had not been easy. As expected, the town had buzzed with gossip when Annabelle declined Elias Jenkins' proposal, and it became known that she was being courted by Beau Zachary instead. Mrs. Hollister had been particularly vocal in her disapproval, warning Annabelle that she was throwing away security for a man whose prospects were as unstable as his father's had been. The school board had called an emergency meeting, concerned about their teacher's judgment. But Sheriff Davis, surprisingly, had spoken in Beau's favor, describing his determination in rebuilding his ranch and his responsible handling of business matters. In the end, they had decided that Annabelle's personal life was her own affair, as long as she maintained her excellent teaching standards. Jenkins himself had accepted her decision with quiet dignity, though his oldest son had needed time to adjust to seeing Beau and Annabelle together. By spring, however, even they had reached a state of civil coexistence, if not friendship. Beau had worked tirelessly through the winter and early spring, rebuilding his cabin in a better location on his property and expanding his cattle herd with careful breeding and management. The new structure was larger than his original cabin, with a proper kitchen, 2 bedrooms, and a small study where Annabelle could prepare her lessons and store her books. Thinking deep thoughts, came a familiar voice, and Annabelle turned to see Beau approaching, freshly washed and changed from his work clothes into a clean shirt and his best jeans. "Just reflecting on how much has changed since last autumn," she replied, her heart still quickening at the sight of him. "The new schoolhouse, the library, your rebuilt ranch." "Us," he added softly, coming to stand beside her. Though they were in public, he allowed his hand to brush against hers briefly. "Have I told you today how beautiful you look?" Annabelle felt her cheeks warm. 5 months of courtship had not diminished the effect he had on her. "You're biased, Mr. Zachary." "Completely," he agreed without hesitation, but also correct. The thing was, Annabelle had begun to see herself differently through Beau's eyes. The plain Jane the town had dismissed had bloomed under his admiration. She stood straighter, smiled more freely, and had even begun wearing her hair in a softer style that framed her face, accentuating the features he claimed to find so captivating. "Are you ready for tomorrow?" he asked, nodding toward the church visible at the far end of the main street, where final preparations for their wedding were underway. "Almost. Lily's mother helped with the last adjustments to my dress this morning." She glanced around to ensure they weren't overheard, then added, "I'm more concerned about the following day, when you take me home to the ranch as your wife." His eyes darkened at her words, and he cleared his throat. "That makes 2 of us." Their courtship had been proper and restrained in public, observed by the watchful eyes of the town, but there had been moments of privacy that promised much more once they were married. Stolen kisses in the schoolhouse after dark, quiet conversations by the fire at his rebuilt cabin, his hands learning the contours of her face and the sensitive spot at the nape of her neck that made her shiver. "Miss Sawyer," called Mrs. Mason from across the schoolyard, "could you help us with serving the desserts?" "Duty calls," Annabelle said with a smile. "Will you stay for the picnic?" Beau nodded. "Wouldn't miss it. Besides, I promised Tommy Parker I'd show him how to throw a lasso." As he watched her walk away to help with the food, Beau marveled at the turn his life had taken. The man who had once believed that the frontier was no place for attachment now found himself counting the hours until he could claim Annabelle as his wife, until they could begin building a life that encompassed both her passion for teaching and his dreams for the ranch. The townspeople who had once whispered that he'd never amount to much now tipped their hats when he passed. Those who had dismissed Annabelle as plain and unremarkable now saw the intelligence and warmth that had been there all along. Together they had transformed not just their own lives but in small ways the community around them. Tomorrow, in the white clapboard church, they would exchange vows before the town that had judged them both and found them wanting. But today, surrounded by children's laughter and the simple joy of a community gathering, Beau Zachary already felt blessed beyond measure. He had lost his cabin but found a home, in the heart of a woman who had seen past his defenses to the man he could become. The wedding of Annabelle Sawyer and Beau Zachary in June of 1880 was remembered in Cottonwood Creek for years to come, not for its extravagance, but for the palpable joy that radiated from the couple as they spoke their vows. Annabelle wore a simple gown of ivory silk with lace at the collar and cuffs, her light brown hair arranged in soft waves beneath a veil borrowed from Lily Mason's mother. Beau, clean-shaven and nervous, waited at the altar in a new suit purchased specifically for the occasion, his dark hair neatly combed and his eyes never leaving Annabelle as she walked toward him on Sheriff Davis's arm. The church was filled to capacity, with even Mrs. Hollister dabbing at her eyes despite her previous disapproval. Elias Jenkins sat with his children in a middle pew, his expression solemn but composed as he watched the woman he had hoped to marry choose another. When Reverend Watson pronounced them husband and wife, the kiss they shared was brief but filled with promise, bringing applause and a few good-natured whistles from the cowboys who had worked with Beau over the years. The celebration afterwards spilled from the church onto the main street, with tables of food contributed by the town's families and music provided by local players. Beau and Annabelle danced beneath lanterns strung across the street, her laughter carrying on the early summer air as he twirled her with surprising grace for a man more accustomed to breaking horses than dancing. As twilight deepened into night, they slipped away to begin the journey to their ranch, to the home they would share, to the future they had chosen together. In the years that followed, the town of Cottonwood Creek watched as Beau and Annabelle Zachary built a life that defied every low expectation that had been set for them. The ranch flourished under Beau's determined management, growing from a struggling homestead to a respectable operation that employed several hands during busy seasons. Annabelle continued teaching, riding to and from town each day during the school term, her dedication to her students unwavering even as her family grew. Their first daughter, born in the spring of 1881, had Beau's dark hair and Annabelle's thoughtful eyes. Their son followed 2 years later, and a second daughter 2 years after that. The children grew up with books in one hand and reins in the other, as comfortable in the classroom as they were on horseback. The Zachary home became known for its hospitality, with frequent gatherings that brought together ranch hands and townspeople alike. The bookshelves Beau built along one wall expanded year by year, filled with volumes of poetry, history, science, and stories that were read aloud during winter evenings by the fire. And if anyone remembered that the town had once dismissed Annabelle as too plain to attract a husband, or had written off Beau as following in his father's doomed footsteps, they kept such thoughts to themselves. For the evidence of how wrong they had been was visible in the thriving ranch, the well-educated children, and most of all, in the way Beau and Annabelle looked at each other, still after all those years, as if they were seeing something remarkable that no one else could quite perceive. In a land where survival often demanded everything and offered little in return, they had found not just subsistence but abundance. Not in wealth or ease, but in the sharing of burdens and joys, in the family they created, and in the love that had recognized worth where others saw only ordinariness. Their story became part of Cottonwood Creek's history, told and retold as an example of how appearances could deceive, how judgment could blind, and how the heart, when allowed to choose freely, often saw truths that the eye missed entirely. For the plain schoolteacher and the struggling rancher had built something beautiful together, a life that neither could have created alone, a legacy that would continue long after them in the land they tended, the children they raised, and the community they helped shape. And in the quiet moments, when the day's work was done and they sat together on the porch of their home, watching the sun set over land that had once seemed so unforgiving, Beau would sometimes take Annabelle's hand and recite from memory the Wordsworth verses she had first lent him during that pivotal winter. For I have learned to look on nature, not as in the hour of thoughtless youth, but hearing oftentimes the still, sad music of humanity. To which Annabelle would always respond by completing the verse, and much it grieved my heart to think what man has made of man. Then they would smile at each other, no further words needed between two people who had seen beyond what others had made of them to what they could make of themselves, together.